Hey everyone, it's I'm Alejandro, and this is the Arts Calling podcast, the place where I interview hardworking independent creatives in the literary, visual, and performing arts. I have two requests for you today. If you could do me a favor and stop by the episode description, not only do we have information about this guest and their links, but we also have a weekly shout out, so be sure to check out those links in the episode description so that we can support independent artists in the literary, visual, and performing arts. I think there's a lot of work to be done to get the word out about these independent people who are creating phenomenal work. Item number 2, be sure to stop by Cruise Notes over at cruisefolio.com/cruise notes. That is my newsletter that I send out once a month, and it's starting to ramp up because I'm going to have a writing and recording August for myself, and I hope to do a lot of fun things. So please stop by and sign up so that you can get one email a month from me featuring all of the amazing things happening over at the Cruise Folio Network. We have Coalition Works Literary Journal, issue 8 is coming out now. Stuff like that is going to be included, and I hope you join us on this creative adventure. And with that said, let's welcome our guest. Today, I'm delighted to be Arts Calling Audrey Cefaly. Cefaly is an alumna of the Playwrights Arena cohort at Arena Stage, a recipient of the Walter E. Dakin Fellowship from the Sewanee Writers Conference, and a Dramatist Guild Foundation Traveling Master. She is published by Concord Theatricals, Smith & Kraus, and Applause Books. Cefaly's plays have been produced by Cincinnati Playhouse, Florida Studio, Florida Rep, City Theater, Penobscot Theater, Gulfshore Playhouse, Merrimack Rep, Signature Theater, Barter Theater, Vermont Stage, Oregon Contemporary Theater, 16th Street Theater, Capitol Stage, About Face, Kitchen Dog Theater, Circle Theater, Theater 3, Aurora Theater, Quotidian Theater Company, and University of Alabama at Birmingham. Woo! Her play, Alabaster, received an 11-city rolling world premiere, the largest in National New Play Network history. She's one of my favorite people to talk about playwriting things, the playwriting life, and her latest work. Be sure to sign up for her newsletter, How to Playwright, one of my favorite resources for folks who are starting to get involved with playwriting or are looking to further their creative career as a playwright. It's a great inspiration to me. As always, at Arts Calling, we talk about life and the cosmos and all kinds of nonsense, but today we center our conversation on The Last Wide Open, which is Audrey's latest production. It is currently running at American Blues Theater through August 18th. So if you're in the Chicago area, feel free to check it out. And with that extensive prelude out of the way, let's give Audrey a welcome back to the podcast, and let's give her a call. How are you, Audrey? How's life? It's been a little bit.
Good morning. Yes, it has. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it feels like it's been a lifetime. How long has it been since we chatted?
I want to say it's been about a year, something to that
Wow.
effect. Yeah, time flies.
Wow.
But I tell you what,
Yeah.
I was listening to that conversation and I felt like you just jettisoned me into playwriting creativity. And I don't know, you just kind of lit a fire. And I was so happy to hear from you and get together again and see if we could chat a little bit more about that. And of course, about your latest work.
I remember the conversation and I remember thinking, oh, the time is too short. Like they're just it was you and me and Carolyn and we were just jamming and I felt the same way when I re-listened to the podcast. I was like, why can't everybody feel like this? Why can't we talk about, our art like this all the time?
Exactly.
So it was a joy, and I'm so glad to be talking again.
Oh, that's awesome. So the main reason we're talking today is regarding The Last Wide Open, which is a phenomenal play of yours that I had the pleasure of reading. And maybe I'll start with this because this is such a special play. I feel like I see myself in this play in some respect as an immigrant, as somebody who did struggle with language a little bit early on, and you capture something so well about that great divide of language that I sort of want to ask you about the play itself, and then maybe we can talk about the upcoming production in Chicago. But
Sure.
can you share a bit about how this play comes about? Because it has such a peculiar journey.
You mean how it came to me originally, or or the adaptation to a full length?
Yeah, yeah. Let's kind of start there.
Well, it originally was my colleague, and who's a wonderful playwright, lives kind of in the region where I live here in the DC Baltimore area, Bob Bartlett. He wanted to do an evening of diner plays, and I said, I'll be damned if I'm going to write another diner play. You know, the world does not need another diner play. And so, but I was like, well, Bob's asking, so of course I'm going to write one, but how can I make it the anti-diner play? Not just two people sitting at a bistro, table talking about the other, you're talking about a boyfriend or whatever, and the goofy waiter, all the tropes. And so I wrote this one act of this disillusioned waitress who finds herself crying on the floor, cradling a mop, and thinking, how did I get here? And fast forward over the years, the play did really well on the one act circuit and won lots of awards and is part of my collection, Love is a Blue Tick Hound. 5, 6 years ago now, Blake Robeson at Cincinnati Playhouse and I were chatting about a project that we might, work on together, that could be a world premiere there. And I said, well, I have this little one act, this little love story. And he said, oh, I love this. Let's adapt it, to a full length. And I said, well, I've always wanted to lengthen it, but I just never knew how to do it, which is why I haven't done it yet. And then at some point, I kind of had a breakthrough with how to do that. Some plays you can just kind of lengthen them. You can just kind of pull them out because the core doesn't change, and it's
Mm,
just a matter of adding backstory, and this central arc and the climax and all that can sort of stay
yeah.
intact, sort of in order, and it's just a matter of drawing it out. But this play felt a little thin when I kind of imagined it going that way. So I thought, well, what if I take the original one act and pair it with two other one acts and, three variations on the same love story. And um, in fact, the play is called Love Story in Three Movements. And as I was trying to do that, it became clear that it was not so easy because you're talking about a world premiere at Cincinnati Playhouse. You don't want to show up with, an evening of one acts.
Mm,
How do they relate? How does the story bigger than itself, told three different ways? And so I learned in the writing process, which is the hardest thing I've ever tried to write by an order of magnitude. I realized that it needed sort of an outer shell or an outer membrane to kind of contain it, to kind of contextualize it, to ground us back to, square one when we keep trying, sort of in this world of, I suppose some people compare the play to sliding doors.
hmm.
I kind of think it's like Frankie and Johnny meets Groundhog's Day.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, you, like these three what if scenarios. And so there's this outer shell where the characters kind of talk directly to each other as narrators, and then also engage with the audience as well. Um, and then Matthew Nielsen happened to be the sound designer for the show. And I said, what if we write some original music for this? And so, of course, I want to just have to make things as complicated as possible. So we decided that we would do that too. And that's how it ended up with music, was just my desire to kind of, hang ourselves. um, and so that's how the full length came about.
I would never have pegged this play to be something that arose from various origins, as in you had a couple of different plays that were not part of the one thing. It feels so organic as I read it, and the characters feel like they are.
Oh, no, no. Well, they're not. they weren't separate ideas for plays,
Okay.
more that it was the original one act, which I thought, maybe I'll put that in, as the ending, and then I'll write two brand new other,
Okay.
short one acts
Yeah.
as sort of companions to that, but still with the same characters. But I had, had this spreadsheet of these two characters, right? Plus the
Hmm.
stagehand, which I didn't want to give the stagehand actual lines because that would mean that you'd have to hire another, equity act,
Sure,
in this
sure.
case, another actor that wasn't budgeted for. Again, I'm writing, I have this commission, right? And so I don't want to like say, oh, let's just start adding more characters. Um, so the stagehand is there, like matching wallpaper, there, not there, very useful, um, but never really speaks. And so you've got two characters, and the idea is, um, what choices in the lives of these two characters did they make along the way that influence how their lives would have been different? In Lena's case, she's an American. She's a waitress. She lives next door to this man who has two little chihuahuas named Zigzag and Fritz, and she comes to work every day at this diner. Well, in every movement, there's this other person named Todd who she's either dating in one movement, about to marry in another movement, or has parted ways with
Mm.
in yet another movement for reasons. And the same with Roberto, who in the Polish version of this play is named Mikolaj. And he also has consistent things in his life. He has a best friend, Philippe, who is in love with his girlfriend. And so there's this, oh, some friend, stealing your girl, and he's other constants in his life that really wouldn't change regardless of how long he's been in the country. um and we can get more into that, but so basically it's I had to have this spreadsheet to keep it all straight, like what things would always stay the same and what things would be different if only a few slight things, you know uh sort of altered the course of
Yeah.
events.
They never
Yeah.
felt like they were completely out of left field. They did feel very real time, real world, variations of something, which, I mean, just lent to the credibility of the piece. And I think it might be a good segue to talk about this Polish version because the first one that I read was with Roberto, and from that
Mhm.
point, you're collaborating now with American Blues Theater. You have this production going on right now, and I'm
Yeah.
curious about that process. How did you get to collaborate with these folks at American Blues Theater? How did that start? And when does the translator collaboration come in? Because that seems super interesting to me.
Sure. Well, the play was delayed a few times for various reasons. One of them was post-pandemic kind of pain points of not having a space.
Mm,
They performed at various different locations until they finally, very just recently, actually in the past 2 years,
mhm,
finally have their own physical space, which I'm just so happy for them.
mhm,
They're so deserving. And Wendy Whiteside, their district director there, had said to me, hey, I think let's postpone your play and let's make it the first production in the studio space. And we'll get two Chicago regulars in it. And we'd like to tailor it to our Polish community here and adapt the play for the Chicago Polish community
mm,
by setting it in a Polish restaurant versus an Italian restaurant. And I do say in the play this that it can be tailored to whatever audiences want it more, tailored to their region
mhm,
or community,
yeah,
but also that the character of Roberto can be, um, from he can be an immigrant from anywhere,
mhm,
because I didn't want people not to do the play, simply because they couldn't find someone who was strong with an Italian dialect, for instance, or In the case of the Spanish translation, which was, I guess, 2 seasons ago now at Adirondack Theater Festival, we did a Spanish translation. I worked with a woman named Selena Martinez and the artistic director there, Miriam Weisfeld, to tailor it for their community and also for Spanish-speaking immigrants.
Hmm.
And so we set his home country as Mexico. In that case, it was really important for us to find a person of color,
Hmm.
someone who truly was English as a second language. So I want people to be able to do the play and really capitalize on whatever language the actor that they have in mind is best suited for. And in most ideal of cases, if you have an actor that does come that is truly an immigrant, that's all the better. That's ideal. And so I'll work with each theater to do that.
That's incredibly generous of you to do because I know that there's a lot of
Yeah.
playwrights who just have extreme hesitation to make the slightest change about a script like that. But you've
Yeah.
always acted this way or worked this way, had this philosophy of complete collaboration. Does the play continue to change? How do you reconcile that for yourself, or what's your philosophy on that? Because some people say, "Okay, my play's done. I get to move on with my life." Does that affect you in a negative way to just keep coming back to the play and making those changes?
100%. It always makes the play better. I had the great fortune to work with Kathy Mueller, wonderful Polish language consultant for this current production at American Blues on the Polish translation. And she was very intent on being mindful that and respectful that it's my play, right? While also creating that sort of connective tissue that feels true to the characters as well as the Polish experience, singularly in Chicago, right? Free of condescension, without some of the traps, that some writers fall into when they try to write, in the Polish English syntax. It often comes like these painful um, these painful stereotypes or caricatures of Polish immigrants, and that just wouldn't ring true to the Polish community in terms of how Polish immigrants really communicate um, as new speakers of English, specifically around Americans. And so, and I can share some details on some of the things
Yeah,
that
yeah.
some of the little tidbits that we worked on. But there were moments when she said, a Polish person simply wouldn't say that, or
Yeah.
please help me understand the meaning behind this section because when I'm reading it, I'm interpreting it this way. What do you mean by that?
Mhm.
you know, what one silly, funny example, and there were some more serious ones, but one silly example is in the Italian or Spanish version of the play, there's this angry customer that is at the restaurant fighting with her husband because he's asked for a divorce. And so there's a basically she throws a plate of food in his direction,
Mhm.
and there's fettuccine stuck to the wall or the ceiling. And so Kathy and I determined that, it wouldn't be fettuccine. In Polish, it would probably be something else. And she made some just suggestions. And I said, well, I really would love, something that also has 3 syllables. How about pierogi? And she goes, well, pierogi wouldn't stick to the wall. That's just not what pierogi does. And I'm like, surely pierogi would stick to the wall if it was in the right kind of sauce or whatever. I said, well, let's debate about it in the actual play. Let's have Lena say, how does pierogi even do that? How is that a pierogi stuck to the wall? How does pierogi even do that? And she goes, see, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
And so I find that whenever someone pushes back at me with whether something is um, accurate or whatever, I can use it as an opportunity for the characters to actually debate it real time. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
it's a win-win. And so the play is always richer through collaboration. I've said this a million times with directors, other writers, with my collaborator and dramaturg Carolyn Messina. I invite, and sometimes it is painful, sure, but I do invite that critical eye, even from non-writers who are just coming at it and saying, I didn't understand what was happening there.
Hmm.
There was a gentleman one time in an world premiere of my play Maytag Virgin who said, I didn't understand. After this happened in the play, I thought that was the ending of it. And then there was another scene, and I really thought the play was over at that point. So, I went years, and it just stuck with me. Like, I wonder why he thought that. And then it occurred to me that it was a sound cue that was causing that assumption. It was a very ambiguous sound cue. But more than that, I feel like maybe he felt like I had said what I needed to say at that point, and that the final scene was really already maybe one layer too many. And so when I began to triangulate that feedback with other data points that I had received from other people along the way of the journey of that play, I began to understand, oh, there really is one too many scenes in this play. And so when I finally had the play published, it was a second draft after seeing it live
Mm.
in its original form. I said to myself, I think I need to combine these final two scenes. Well, if I hadn't had all the data points, and that gentleman, during the world premiere, just an
Right.
audience member saying, "Hey, I was confused by this," I might not ever have found the fix. And now I feel like the play ends 4 or 5 minutes earlier, which is always a good thing, a long play. And I'm not repeating myself tonally, you know?
Hmm.
And sometimes that's a really hard lesson to learn as writers too, where you say, now wait a minute, I'm not repeating myself. He's saying other things. That's true. He is saying other things, but tonally you've visited this area of nuance, this area of emotional sort of intent. You've already visited that place, so is that
Hmm.
an opportunity for you to combine other tonally adjacent sentiments all together in a scene that really isn't going to affect the arc of it or the storyline at all? Find ways to combine your areas of emotional intent or tone, um, just to tighten things up, frankly,
Yeah, to eliminate that redundancy. I mean, it's so amazing
Yeah.
to be receptive, always receptive to that feedback. It's so difficult sometimes, depending on what kind of state of mind you're in, I suppose. But as you get into the production for this one that's happening in Chicago, what was that relationship working with Wendy in terms of her as a director of your work, and what were some things that you learned about your characters during this production?
She and I were kind of hands off.
Mm,
I mostly spent time with Kathy, the language consultant translator for the play. I mostly spoke through her. She truly was kind of a liaison
mm,
between my voice and Wendy as director. It's a lot of the questions that arose as to what things meant and all that were sort of kind of answered through the translation process. And Wendy gave us such a wonderful, luxurious one-on-one time, me and Kathy. Um, or Kathy and I, we were allowed to work together with the full confidence that Wendy had that between the two of us, we would figure it out and we would make it as pristine as we could. And when we finally turned over the translation, Wendy had just a few extra questions like, okay, how do you want us to work? How do you want us to deal with this stagehand? There it says it's stagehand wheels on a cart and has a sign that says fake props. And I was like, you don't have to have a sign. It's there. I thought it to me, it was just funny. It was written in the time of, the last election or whatever. And
Hmm.
it's the idea of fake news, fake props or whatever. And I said, you don't have to have that. And then, she had questions about the use of things like wine and vodka and all that. And I said, before you start substituting out, wine, I think she said, can we use something other than wine? Because we have found that, let's play it on the safe side, but wine can stain clothing, it can stain tablecloths. And I said, I don't care if you use this or that. I said, but I know that Kathy has very strong opinions about whether it's vodka, whether it's a Polish beer. I said, if you have questions specifically about that, you're gonna want to talk to her because we had many back and forths about it. In the Italian version, in the Spanish version, it's prosecco.
Mm.
They talk of drinking prosecco, and so what is the option here? I don't want Lena walking into the restaurant and immediately drinking vodka, even though that's what she would be drinking. Because when an American does that, you automatically assume, like, is this person an alcoholic? Does she have a drinking problem? And I didn't want the audience to go off thinking, oh, every time Lena walks into the restaurant, she's drinking vodka, just drinking it like a fish. And, that's not what that means in that community. It's just, the culture.
Right.
So little things like that where you have to say, what is the choice? What is the significance of the choice? What would be the most realistic and how can you compromise? And so um, both Kathy and Wendy were just incredible with that, wanting to try to understand the intent of it and meeting in the middle with solutions that worked for everybody. It was really a dream team to work with. I could not have asked for a better experience.
No, it's great to hear, and it seems like it's gotten some phenomenal results. It's getting great reviews. There's a lot
Yes.
of four-star reviews as I'm researching and looking, but at its core, it's a very tender play. There's those jagged edges that we've talked about before, the stuff that you really like to dig into. You see their heartbreak on the page, and I think that seems to have translated really well, no matter what the language is, or as you're transposing that background of one of the characters, it really retains that sense of heartbreak that you seem to imbue really well into your characters. I don't know how you do this, but there is that hint of sadness and longing and dreaming or reconciling broken dreams, but then there's a sort of finer, you know, hint of hope and optimism. And I think
Hmm.
this show in particular, I was really taken with how emotional it got me at the end. And I was just reading it and I was like, how does she do this? Do you feel like writing something with that sense of optimism is a bit more challenging, or what do you feel is your default setting as you're starting to write a play?
Oh, my default setting. Well, first, I just want to touch on the idea that in this particular play, there's this sort of sense of atmosphere that is sort of pervasive throughout the three acts. You have the rainstorm and the thunder and all that comes
Mhm.
in every single act at the same time, every night. And I said to Wendy, I said, I want when the thunderstorm hits in movement two and in movement three, by the time, in movement three, I want people to feel like that thunderclap, or that rush of rain or sheeting of rain. I want them to feel like old friends. And so make them
Mm.
distinct, make them at the same intervals in every three movement, because you're experiencing the same night of atmospheric conditions three times in a row,
Mhm.
and you're like, right, right, right. They get the phone call. I want the audience to invest in that. They love an investment, right? Right. First, there's a phone call. Someone's asking if they're still open, and then you start hearing the rain, and then you start hearing the thunder, and then there's that really loud thunderclap. So the atmosphere, as well as the silence that is woven into these plays, and in this play in particular, is another driver. It's another voice in the play. It says this play is more than just interesting, funny, scenes, it's also the worlds colliding to try and bring these two people together. And it's stormy and it's nuanced and it's dark and it's messy.
Hmm.
Um, but look at how freaking adorable they are trying to work it out. And you will find those conditions in almost all of my plays. There's some kind of, I don't want to say, some sort of atmosphere in the Gulf. They're out on the water, and the waters can be scary if you're stuck out at night and it's getting cold.
Hmm.
And in Maytag version, there's a really big rainstorm that comes in at the end of Act One. And then in Alabaster, one of the characters relives a tornado that took out our family. And so I always sort of have my characters warring against nature, warring against themselves. Mostly it's them warring against themselves, um, and then warring against another, to try and find the meaning of their own inner turmoil. So there's a parallel at play. There's also, it's hardly ever a character, trying to win the lottery or trying to, that's all of that is just secondary. It's a character in absolute disarray, to almost non-functioning, who's trying to figure it out. And I think that's all of us. If you put a character in a situation where they're a mountain climber, right? And you ask people to come and watch a story about a mountain climber, they'll come and watch it if they believe that there's something about it that they can connect with. Even though I don't know anything about mountain climbing, if you take me close enough to the interior world of that character and what they're really struggling with, I'm going to recognize the fear in their eyes. I'm going to recognize that sadness as something that I've experienced myself,
Right.
or maybe something that I haven't experienced that I've always wanted to. There they are, deeply in love. Well, maybe I'm a person that has never experienced what they're experiencing, and so it touches my heart that way. I guess I just always want to create an experience of characters in struggling with their own worth, and how do the people that they interact with along the way color and change where that sits
Hmm.
on the meter reading of life. That's where I start always. It is what I write about, and I maintain that there's plenty of roller coaster theatrics, to be found in simply watching a relationship either fall apart or come together. To me, that's what I call theatricality.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a great sense of theatricality in that poetic visual, in that sensory experience that you introduce with the sound, as sort of like it is kind of a way to illustrate the intensity of that longing, of that sadness, of that rage. And in this play throughout, as I said, even reading it, you capture that so well. But one of my favorite moments that I think encapsulates sort of the wedge, the wide gap between where these characters are is right around the halfway point where you have Lena using the translator, or she's waiting for the translation, but then she says, this is not what I mean. I actually mean, that I can't believe that I'm marrying this person, or something to that effect.
mhm.
But there is that gulf of language that I don't know. To me personally, I just felt so struck by that moment because it was so sweet, but there was that complete vulnerability, that tenderness that I think made the play really special for me. Could you talk a little bit about?
I love that moment.
Yeah, yeah. Could you share a bit about how you managed to make the translation aspect of it theatrical? Because I love that scene. So I just thought that was a really wonderful moment. But if you could share a bit, maybe as an example, how you worked with that device as a way to create vulnerability, because that was really special.
Yeah, so that's movement two. Just a little context. In movement one, Mikolaj has only been in the country, for 2 years. In movement two, he's only been in the country 2 days.
Mhm.
And then in movement three, I think it was either 10 or 15 years, certainly long enough for him to, not only get a degree, but a secondary degree, and become a teacher. But in movement two, he's only been here for 2 days. And so I said to myself, how would he communicate? And so I had to really get creative, and think, what are some ways that, you know, a waitress and a dishwasher would be able to tell each other, how they feel or what's going on or what their needs are. And in the original version, Lena happens to have, well, first she starts out asking his advice on wedding veils because she's
Right.
trying to convey to him that she's getting married, in 7 days, to someone she really doesn't want to get married to, but I digress. But so, and even without use of translation, Mikolaj, he can sense the disturbance in the void, as it were. He can somehow sense that whatever, once he sort of gleans the idea that this is a wedding and that, she's like, can you help me set up for this wedding? At first, he doesn't know that it's her wedding. He just understands, oh, they're setting up for some sort of party. And then when he finds out it's her wedding, he's like, oh, well, congratulations. This is amazing speaking, So she somehow conveys, through the stage directions that she's hesitant about it, or that and he can just sort of tell that
Mhm.
she's not happy with the situation. And then so, she gets his opinion on these wedding veils, and you don't need a translator for that. He's just like, do you like this wedding veil? And he's just enraptured by her. No matter, she could be wearing a paper sack, he doesn't care. But he takes his kind of look of shock of how beautiful she is, walking around in these wedding veils, trying to pick one. She takes, his reaction as one of distaste, but it's not. But she, she's just like looking for markers, and she's like, you know what, I don't like this one either. um Finally, when she tries on the third one, you can just absolutely tell that it's his absolute favorite. Like,
Mhm.
she's knocked it out of the park. And so they communicate, sort of visually, and she kind of nudges him around the room. You sit here, you handle these candles. Aren't they cute? Look, the candles, they turn on and off, and they have this cute little moment where she's like, beep, boop, turning them on and off. And then she has this idea that, or it's actually he that has the idea that, he knows that he can turn on his phone and key in something, and it can translate. In the original, it was, she happened to have her laptop, but in working with Kathy with this translation, her idea was just to use a phone. And at first I was like, I don't know about a phone. And then I was like, oh, absolutely. It would be better if it was a cell phone, to just pass it back and forth. And when she realizes, oh, they can just talk through, Google Translate or whatever, things start to open up differently. And then you begin to experiment with, how exactly does it translate? Does it translate exactly how you meant, you know, or is it slightly off? What do you choose to type into it? And then so there comes a moment, where, they're translating back and forth and exchanging pleasantries. But then she gets to the real hard truth that she's getting married in 7 days, and she says, and I'm not going to type that into the translator. I'll just sit here and smile, and you'll think I'm just talking about, something or nothing, but really I'm dying inside, and I'm getting married in 7 days, and he's dull, and he's this and is this, and his mother doesn't see it, but I see it, and I hate her dress, and And I just hate her dress. And, she's landing at the airport in however many days, and she's got some weird foot appointment. And I don't do foot appointments, and so she doesn't type any of this, but he just watches her as she speaks, and
Right.
he just knows without knowing. And then she's so desperate at that point. She's like, "So can I please just read some of your poetry? Just one poem, please, anything at all above a third grade level." And so that's when he shares one of his poems. He's always writing in this little journal. And that's where things begin to change, because even though she doesn't understand the words that he speaks in Polish or Italian or Spanish, once he types this poem of his into the translator and she reads the translation of it, as awkward as the translation is, it's still beautiful enough for her to recognize who's really sitting in front of her.
Mhm.
This man is a poet. First, he kind of blows it off like, what do you write about? And he says the stock market, and she knows that's not true. And then we realize that this is a man that, writes in his journals wherever he goes in the world, and he likes to write about broken hearts. And that's when we see that, I think we begin to understand, that this man is a poet. No matter what movement of the play we're in, the composite of him is stronger by the movement or by the hour of someone who feels very, very deeply, who's a super empath and a really keen observer
Mhm.
of human behavior, and of Lena in particular. He watches her. He saw her at the farmer's market, and he says, the color
Oh
of
yeah, yeah.
she had on an orange dress, the color of the sun. It leaves me without air, without the air to breathe. I walk a step behind and hide in lonely doorways, and you think, for a moment, oh, he's a stalker, but he's not. He's
Just
not.
yeah.
He just happened to see her there. It's not like he followed her there.
Right,
She was
right.
there and he was there, and he was, just like, I've never seen her out in the open, and she's out of her work clothes, and look how beautiful she is. So he sees in her the beauty that she does not see in herself.
Mhm.
She's just sort of resigned to this idea in life that she'll always be alone, that she's run out of chances, and that, love is shitty. And over the course of the play, it's sort of his job to convince her otherwise, that, well, yeah, sure, love is going to have its obstacles, it's going to have its downsides, but we do it because we must. It is, that's what we do as humans. It is the most importance. We keep trying,
Mhm.
that we don't just give up in despair, because when love wins, it's absolutely worth it. You know,
Yeah.
there's a moment when they're pleading with the audience. She's trying to convince them, look, give up on this love story. He's like, no, they're all waiting for us to figure it out. That's why they're still sitting here. And she's like, run for the exits. And he's like, look, he even like polls the audience, raise your hand if she's like, raise your hand if love is shitty. He's like, raise your hand if you do it anyway. And so there's this great debate of, he's asking her to gamble one more time, and she's like, the gambling of love has only ever brought me heartache, which
Mhm.
is that's a valid
Yeah.
argument. You can't argue that, really. So I don't think either one of them is wrong in their sentiment there. It's a
Right.
great debate. How long do you keep trying before you realize the character? I'll say this one thing: the character of Lizzie in my play Maytag, she says one of the most cynical things of any of my protagonists, female heroines. She goes, I don't want to believe this is true, but maybe there are some people that aren't meant to have the love that they need in this world, or to be loved in the way that they ought to.
Mm.
You
Man.
know?
Yeah. And, it might be a miserable journey to get to the truth, to get to that love, but for us, it is an enthralling experience. And I absolutely love watching them go through this struggle. It was definitely one of my favorites recently. So I know that we've talked for a little bit. I just have one more question for you. And first and foremost, this has been such a blast, Audrey. I could just listen to you talk about playwriting for days and days, but I know that we don't have that much time. So I'm trying to be a little bit more direct about this question because the reason I started this podcast was to figure out how people define a life well lived as artists. I personally don't believe that we need to be starving in order to be creatively fulfilled. That there are other ancillary aspects to life that make us better artists. And I'm curious how you have gone about defining a life well lived for yourself. What are those parameters or those things that you have set for yourself that help you out in life outside of the creative life, where it could be anything?
Well, first of all, I think it's a great time to ask such a question because a lot of artists right now, playwrights, particularly actors too, all people in the theatrical arts are really asking themselves this question. Like what is it all for? If theaters are going to be closing, if opportunities are going to be dwindling, if, audiences may or may not be coming back, we don't know what the future holds. And so when artists come to me now in various conversations that I have, and they say, how are you doing? And I ask back, well, how are you doing? And we say, and sometimes it's even like a social media post where people are talking openly about it, like there's always a sentiment of like, I just don't know. I don't know where my life's going to be. I don't know if it's worth it to continue. And while I say, diversify or die, that's the practical advice. If you're an artist right now, particularly if you're a playwright, think about other pursuits outside of just writing that bring you great joy, but that keep you close to your art. That's really important because if it all falls apart, you haven't lost everything, and at the same time, you've learned something new and found another way to just get the art out there. But the main thing I want to say is that just to know why you're arting in the first place. Is it because you have something that you're gnawing on over the years that you keep coming back to, that you just need to get out? Is it when you sit down and you look at all of your creations, and I don't mean maybe the things that you've written, maybe paintings, maybe cooking, maybe parenting, maybe teaching. Um, if you sit down and you take all of your creative outlets and you put them all on the table in front of you, whether it's little note cards or actual scripts or actual creations, you put everything out on the table in front of you and you ask yourself, what does all of it mean? It's a bit like writing an artist statement. And you say, oh, well, at the core, is it that I want to appreciate and understand the world better, or that I'm seeking love and acceptance, or that I want to try to understand the deeper questions of the world, or is it that I want to leave something behind? I want to be a bright spot in the world for others if I can. Once you begin to understand the common theme among everything that's sitting there in front of you, you get closer to your core as a human, I think. And that for me has been my constant north, is understanding that the world is in a lot of pain, and that through my actions, through my interactions with other humans, through the things that I write on social media, to the scripts that I write and toil over for, a decade sometimes, what I really want to impart is that there is hope and that you're not alone, and the world needs hope. They absolutely need stories of healing. And sometimes, oftentimes, art helps you through the grieving process, identity crisis, in a way that nothing else can. And so, if I can create that kind of art for people when they experience it, they feel less alone, or they have some sort of way to interpret the pain that they're feeling. So I think that's what keeps me going. That's what I consider a life well lived, is have I done all that I can do as an artist to take away some of the suffering in the world in my own little small way. That gives me hope, but it also affirms me that what I've made of my life is not nothing. Sort of sums it up.
That is about as concise and beautiful as anyone can put it. So I want to thank you for giving us a wonderful note to end on. But Audrey, thank you so much for the work that you're doing as an artist, for the way that you're going about it and the people that you're writing about. I hope that everyone goes and checks out your newsletter as well, How to Playwright, one of my favorite things on the internet. But I'm thankful for you and your work and your time. And also, I hope that folks check out The Last Wide Open if you're in the Chicago area. I guess it's running until the end of August, right? Or the 18th, something like that.
Yeah, yeah, sounds about right. And I think they might, yeah.
Awesome.
There might be another little surprise in the works later in the year. But yeah, Chicago audiences, and it's selling very, very well. So if you can't get a ticket, for this weekend, keep trying. But it's definitely quintessential Chicago experience. I urge everyone to get out to see it. Wendy has done a gorgeous job, absolutely gorgeous job, and the designers have really knocked it out of the park. Thank you so much, Jamie, for this. It's just such a joy always to speak with you. Any opportunity that we can do this, I relish it. I thank you for what you do.
Well, I appreciate it. And hey, let's hold out for round 3 some other time. You just let me know and I'll be on standby.
That's right.
I'll be around.
You gotta have a 3 now. That's how it works.
That's right.
Always in 3s.
Take care.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.